The sanctuary felt suffocating that humid Sunday morning in July. I sat in the front pew, squeezed between two elderly women who smelled like lavender perfume. The air conditioning was broken again, and the heat rose from the carpet in waves. Around me, about 90 people sang hymns, their voices creating a sound that should have felt sacred. Instead, it felt like a lie. Uncle Caleb stood behind the mahogany pulpit, his silver hair gleaming under the stage lights. He wore his best suit, the navy one with the gold cufflinks that cost more than my car payment. His Bible was held high above his head like a weapon. "Honesty before God," he thundered, his voice bouncing off the stained glass windows. "We must be truthful in all things. The Lord sees everything. He knows the secrets of our hearts." I nodded along like I always did. I had been nodding along my entire life. Uncle Caleb adopted me when I was 7 years old, 3 days after my parents died in a car accident on Route 9. He became my father, my protector, my hero. He taught me about God, about goodness, about building a life on solid foundations. I have worked as the church bookkeeper since I turned 19. For 5 years, I had treated every single dollar in that account like it belonged to God Himself. My phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down, thinking it was probably my friend Lila sending me a funny meme, or asking about lunch plans. Instead, my chest went tight as I read the bank notification. Another withdrawal from the church account. $2,800. The category listed was personal travel. The authorized signature was Uncle Caleb Ward. It was the third withdrawal like this in July alone. The third one this month. My throat felt dry. I looked up at Uncle Caleb, still preaching about purity and faith and honesty before God. He caught my eye and smiled, that warm, loving smile he had given me 1,000 times. Something inside me cracked like breaking glass. The man preaching about truth was a thief wearing a cross around his neck. "My name is Rachel Monroe, and I need you to understand who I was before everything fell apart. I was the quiet one. That's what my older sister Emma always called me. Rachel is the quiet one," she would say, like it was my defining characteristic, my entire personality wrapped up in 2 words. She was right, though. I had always been afraid of conflict, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of disappointing people I loved. I am an accountant by training. I grew up loving numbers because they don't lie. Numbers tell stories. Numbers don't have feelings that get hurt. Numbers follow rules that make sense. 1 + 1 always equals 2. It doesn't matter how you feel about it or what you want to believe. The math is the math. My parents died when I was in 2nd grade. I was 7 years old, wearing a purple backpack with cartoon characters on it. I was waiting for them to pick me up from after-school care. Then there was a phone call. Then there was Uncle Caleb, with tears streaming down his face, arriving at the facility. Then there was nothing but silence and confusion for a very long time. Uncle Caleb took me in without hesitation. He didn't call social services. He didn't ask his wife if it was okay. He simply opened his home and his heart and became my father. He raised me alongside his own kids in a big house with a backyard and a dog named Grace. He paid for my school uniforms. He helped me with my homework. He taught me that God is real and that goodness matters. He taught me that honesty is the foundation of everything. He taught me that if you can't trust someone, you can't love them. He taught me to look for the best in people, even when they disappointed me. When I finished high school, I went to community college for accounting. Uncle Caleb came to my graduation ceremony. He wore his dress uniform from the church, and he cried when I walked across the stage to get my diploma. After I received it, he hugged me and whispered, "God has gifted you with numbers so you can protect His house, Rachel. This is your calling." The day he offered me the bookkeeper job at Gracefield Church, named after his dog that had passed away, I cried happy tears. I was 19 years old, essentially alone in the world except for him. Suddenly I had a purpose. I had a place to belong. I had a mission from God Himself, or at least that's what I believed. I threw myself into the work completely. I arrived early and stayed late. I kept every receipt organized in color-coded folders. Every number had a purpose. Every withdrawal had documentation. I treated that church account like my own soul depended on its accuracy. My best friend Lila worked in the church office. She had been my friend since we were in kindergarten, sharing crayons and juice boxes. She was everything I wasn't, bubbly, confident, quick with jokes that made people laugh. She made me laugh when life felt too heavy. We had sleepovers at her house almost every weekend. We talked about boys and dreams and the future. I thought I could trust her with anything. I thought she would always have my back. A church deacon named Marcus had been at Gracefield Church for 30 years. He had watched me grow up. He had baptized me when I was 12. One day, when I was about 23 years old, he pulled me aside after a service. His voice was serious, almost scared. "Don't question Caleb too much," he told me quietly, glancing around to make sure no one heard us. "He is the church. The way things work around here. Well, that's just how it is. Some things are better left alone." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought I was helping the church by asking about the numbers that didn't add up. I thought I was protecting God's house. Looking back now, I realize Marcus was trying to warn me about something I wasn't ready to see. The first time I noticed money missing, I thought it was a clerical error. That's what I told myself. A few $100s there, $1,000 there. These were small amounts easily explained away. Maybe donations came in without proper documentation. Maybe supplies got purchased and someone forgot to create a receipt. These things happen in churches all the time. Churches weren't perfect. They were run by human beings and human beings made mistakes. But then the amounts got bigger. I started seeing patterns. $5,000 for missionary outreach. But I couldn't find any missionary program. $10,000 for pastoral development. When I asked what pastoral development meant, I got vague answers and uncomfortable silences. $15,000 for something labeled simply as church discretionary fund. No explanation at all. I spent weeks going through our records late at night, comparing bank statements to receipts. I created spreadsheets with color coding and formulas. My hands shook as I organized everything into detailed columns. Over 3 years, I calculated that approximately $240,000 had been withdrawn under vague categories. None of it matched any actual church projects or expenses I could find documented anywhere. The number was impossible. It was devastating. It was exactly what I feared most. I stayed late at the church office one night, pulling documents from filing cabinets, making careful copies. The copy machine hummed in Word, creating stacks of papers that I organized into folders. I created a detailed report showing every discrepancy, each one clearly labeled with dates and amounts and my explanations for why they didn't match up to anything real. I put together my evidence carefully, methodically, like a case study. Then I copied everything onto a flash drive, thinking I would present it carefully to Uncle Caleb. We would sit down together, just the two of us. I would show him the numbers. I would give him a chance to explain. Maybe there was something I was missing. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the math was telling me a story I didn't want to hear. And there was another explanation hiding somewhere. I had no idea what was about to happen. I had no idea how naive I was being. That night, I went home and put the flash drive in a drawer next to my bed. I told myself I would show it to him this weekend. We could sit down together and figure this out like family. We could solve this problem together. Everything would be okay. The next morning, I arrived at the church office at 8 o'clock sharp, like I did every weekday. I unlocked my door with my key. The office was cold from the air conditioning. I set my coffee on my desk and turned on my computer like always. Then I realized something was wrong. My office door had been unlocked when I arrived. That had never happened before. My door was always locked when I left. I always lock it. I was meticulous about that. My laptop was gone. My computer, the one that held all my files and documents, had simply disappeared from my desk. I stood there frozen, my keys still in my hand, my heart pounding like a bird trapped in a cage. Someone had broken into my office. Someone had stolen my computer. I knew immediately who it was. I knew, and that knowledge was the exact moment when everything changed forever. Uncle Caleb called me into his office the next afternoon. His private office was beautiful, decorated with dark wood and religious paintings and a large mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. His Bible sat open on the desk in front of him, as if he had been reading it before I walked in. He smiled at me warmly. "You've been working so hard, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft and concerned. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him. "I can see the stress in your face. Don't let Satan plant doubt in your heart. That's where temptation lives, in uncertainty and suspicion. He stood up and walked around his desk. He put his hand on my shoulder and I felt sick. This was the same hand that had signed those withdrawal forms. This was the same man who had held me at my parents' funeral. This was the man who had changed my diapers and taught me to ride a bike and dried my tears when I had my first heartbreak. You're struggling, he continued, his voice dripping with concern and love. I see it in your face. The enemy wants to divide us. He wants you to question your own family, your own church. He wants you to doubt. Forgive your own suspicions. Trust in the Lord. Trust in me. He patted my shoulder gently like I was still a child. I forced a smile onto my face, but inside I was burning. I felt anger rising in my chest like a fire that nothing could put out. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that I knew exactly what he was doing. I wanted to confront him with the truth. But I was afraid. More than that, I was confused. This was my uncle. This was the man I loved more than anyone in the world. His wife, Aunt Miriam, watched through the frosted glass window of his office. I could see her silhouette clearly. She was smiling. That smile terrified me more than anything else that day. She knew. They both knew that I had found out about their theft, and they didn't care. They weren't afraid of me. They were confident. Family dinner, Aunt Miriam announced over the phone. She called everyone: my sister Emma, my cousins Derek and Elijah, my uncle's siblings, his brother-in-law, their children. Everyone. The dining room was crowded with relatives, all talking and eating and pretending everything was normal. The table was covered with food. Miriam had made her famous pot roast. She had made 3 different side dishes. She had made homemade rolls. It looked like love. Midway through dinner, after we had eaten the main course and were eating dessert, Aunt Miriam set down her fork deliberately. The room went quiet. Everyone could tell something was coming. She looked directly at me. Rachel has been spreading rumors about Pastor Caleb, she said calmly, like she was commenting on the weather. Terrible, hurtful rumors. Accusations without any basis. Everyone stared at me. I felt my face turn bright red. My hands started shaking. She's being ungrateful, Miriam continued, her voice still perfectly calm and reasonable. After everything Caleb has done for her, after taking her in when she had no one, she repays him with accusations and lies. My cousin Derek spoke up immediately, his voice angry. That's despicable. Rachel, how could you do that to your own uncle? Uncle Caleb wiped his eyes with a napkin, his hands trembling with emotion. I love her like a daughter, he said, his voice breaking. It absolutely breaks my heart that she could think these things about me. It crushes me. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell them about the spreadsheets and the withdrawals and the missing laptop and my stolen computer. But no one was listening. They had already decided I was wrong. They had already made up their minds. I was the villain in this story, and there was nothing I could say to change that. My sister Emma reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, but she didn't say anything to defend me. She was afraid too. As I left the house that night, Aunt Miriam walked me to the door. She leaned close to my ear and whispered so only I could hear. You'll regret crossing us, Rachel. You really will. You have no idea what you're doing. Her breath smelled like wine. Her smile was cold and calculated. I drove home in complete silence, shaking the entire way. The next Sunday at church, everything was different. I walked into the choir room where I usually helped with the music and coordination. I walked in like I had walked in 100 times before. But this time the room went completely silent. Everyone stopped talking and looked away from me. Their eyes refused to meet mine. My best friend Lila couldn't even look at me. She had been standing with 3 other women, chatting, but when I entered, she turned away and pretended to be very interested in the choir music on the wall. During the Sunday service, Uncle Caleb's sermon was about betrayal. There are betrayers in our flock, he said, his voice filled with emotion. People who smile to your face and call you family but work against you behind your back. The Lord knows who they are. The Lord will judge them. As he spoke, he pointed toward different sections of the congregation. But everyone knew who he was talking about. Everyone was looking at me. The crowd applauded his words. They were applauding a speech about me, and they didn't even understand what was happening. After the service ended, Lila slipped me a note. Her handwriting was tiny and nervous, the letters shaking. The note said, "Meet me tonight behind the church. It's worse than you think. Please come. I need to tell you something." I showed up at midnight, terrified and desperate for answers. Lila was already there, waiting in the shadows beside the church dumpster. She was trembling. Her face was pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I found something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "2 sets of donation ledgers. One that Caleb shows to the board of directors, and one that's hidden in his desk drawer. The hidden one shows where the money really goes. I copied it for you." She pressed a USB drive into my hand. "If he finds out I told you, he'll destroy me," she said. "I know he will. He's destroyed other people for less. But I couldn't keep lying to you. You're my best friend." We were still talking when the church lights suddenly flicked on. Brightness flooded the entire area. A silhouette stood in the doorway of the church. It was Uncle Caleb. He had been waiting. He had known we would meet. He stood there, completely calm, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. He walked toward us slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world and no doubt at all about what would happen next. "You can go home now, Lila," he said quietly. "We're done here." Lila ran without saying goodbye. She disappeared into the darkness like a scared rabbit. I was alone with him. "You're young," Uncle Caleb said, standing directly in front of me. "You're scared. You don't understand how the world actually works. I will forgive this moment of weakness. If you delete that drive right now and we never speak of this again." I stared at him. This was the man who had buried my parents. This was the man who had baptized me when I was 12 years old. This was the man who had taught me that God sees everything and knows every secret. "I already made a copy," I whispered. He slapped his Bible shut with a sound like thunder that echoed through the empty parking lot. His face transformed. The warmth was gone. "Then you've declared war on God's house," he said. His voice was no longer warm and fatherly. It was ice. The next week, everything fell apart in slow motion. I arrived at work to find a letter waiting for me. My job as a bookkeeper was gone. The position had been terminated effective immediately. No warning. No chance to explain. No option to resign with dignity. I had no income. I had no savings. I had no family left who would help me. The congregation turned cold toward me overnight. Friends I had known my entire life stopped answering my calls. My phone became silent. At the grocery store, people whispered when I walked past them in the aisles. At my apartment complex, my landlord told me that someone had called asking about my character and mental stability. Someone posted online calling me mentally unstable and dangerous and a threat to the church. I suspected Aunt Miriam was behind the posts because I recognized her writing style, the way she structured sentences, the words she always used. But I didn't have proof. Lila wouldn't speak to me anymore. She had vanished from my life completely. I was becoming a ghost in my own community. People I had known my entire life now treated me like I had a disease. 2 weeks after my firing, a formal letter arrived at my apartment. It was an official notification of termination from church employment. The signature at the bottom was Uncle Caleb's. He had signed it himself, knowing exactly what he was doing. He was ending my career. He was ending my reputation. He was ending my place in the community I had always called home. I sat in my apartment with that termination letter in my hands, and something hardened inside me. It crystallized. It became solid and unchangeable. I had tried to do this quietly. I had tried to give Uncle Caleb a chance to explain. I had tried to protect the family and preserve relationships. None of it mattered. None of my attempts at peace or understanding or love had mattered at all. The next morning, I walked into the county registrar's office. My hands were shaking as I clutched my files. The office was cold and institutional. A clerk looked up at me from her desk, her expression bored and professional. "I'd like to request a formal financial audit on Ward Ministries," I told her. My voice came out stronger than I felt. "And I'm filing a formal complaint about financial misconduct." The clerk's eyes widened. Suddenly her expression changed. "Are you an employee?" she asked. "I was," I said. "I was the bookkeeper for 5 years." "Are you a family member?" she asked carefully, like this information mattered. I thought about that question. Family. Was I still family? Had I ever really been family? Or had I just been useful? Not anymore, I said. The clerk took my paperwork and explained the process. An official auditor would be assigned. The church would be notified of the investigation. There would be interviews and document review and investigation. There would be no going back from this moment. As I left the office, the auditor who had been listening approached me. He was an older man with serious eyes and deep lines in his face from a lifetime of seeing people's worst behaviors. "Are you ready for the fallout if this is true?" he asked me carefully. I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. But I nodded anyway. Word spread through the congregation like wildfire. An audit had been requested. The church was under investigation. People started talking, whispering, wondering what was happening behind the scenes. Uncle Caleb preached harder and angrier the following Sundays. "Some people want to destroy what we have built," he shouted from the pulpit. "They want to tear down this holy place with their envy and bitterness. The enemy works through broken people." Donations stopped completely. Families started leaving. The church that had once been full of almost 100 people on Sunday mornings now had maybe 50. The atmosphere shifted from peaceful and welcoming to anxious and angry. My cousin Elijah sent me a secret message. We had been close growing up. "He's panicking," it said. "I've never seen him like this. He's terrified." Elijah was different from the rest of my family. He had always been kind to me, even when everyone else was cold and distant. But I was terrified to trust anyone anymore. Trust had become a weapon that people used against me. A week into the audit, the auditor sent me an email that made my heart stop completely. "Preliminary results," it said. "We found falsified tax documents. Records don't match. We're expanding our investigation scope significantly." I read those words 20 times. Falsified tax documents. He had committed fraud, not just simple theft. He had committed federal crimes. One afternoon, I was cleaning out my old office at the church. I was trying to retrieve some personal items I had left behind. My favorite pen, some family photos, and a plant I had brought from home. When I opened a drawer I hadn't used in months, I found an old flash drive sitting there. It was labeled 2019 Sermon Recordings. I plugged it into my laptop at home. Most of the files were audio recordings of Sunday sermons. But one file was different. It was labeled with just a date and time. When I opened it, I saw a video file instead of an audio file. I pressed play. The video showed Uncle Caleb and Aunt Miriam in his private office. They didn't know they were being recorded. The video quality was grainy, but the audio was clear. "We need to cover the mission funds before the IRS notices," Miriam was saying. She was pacing back and forth. "Move everything to the offshore account before they ask questions." Caleb was pacing too, his face stressed. "They won't find it," he said. "The dummy corporation is set up under 3 layers of shell companies. Even forensic accountants will have trouble finding the connections." I watched in absolute horror as they discussed their fraud like it was nothing. Like they weren't destroying a church and destroying people's faith and ruining lives. I had evidence now. Real evidence. Video evidence of them confessing to federal crimes. There was a knock at my apartment door that same night. 2 police officers stood outside holding a summons. Caleb was suing me for defamation and breach of confidentiality. The local news picked up the story immediately. "Church pastor sues bookkeeper over financial allegations," the headline read. Articles described me as the bitter niece and a disgruntled former employee. I was portrayed as someone trying to destroy her own family for revenge or money. I became the villain in everyone's story. People who had known me my entire life now saw me as a threat, an enemy, someone who had betrayed her own blood. My landlord called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he said, "but you're 3 months behind on rent. I'm going to have to ask you to move out. I need the apartment available for paying tenants." I had no job. I had no family. I had barely any money left. And now I didn't have a place to live. I packed my belongings into boxes and moved in with a friend from college who had always been kind to me. Her name was Victoria. She didn't ask many questions about my situation, which I was grateful for. My lawyer, a woman named Patricia, called me one afternoon. "You're not the only one who's filed complaints," she said quietly. "There are others." former employees, people who worked at the church. They're all coming forward. 3 former church employees contacted me within days of each other. One woman named Grace had been the administrative assistant for 6 years. She had been forced to forge signatures on invoices for phantom charity organizations. She had thought she was doing holy work, doing what God wanted through her. She cried when she told me her story. She said she had nightmares about her handwriting appearing on fraudulent documents. Another man named Marcus, a different Marcus from the deacon, had been the facilities manager. He had been instructed to set up fake contracts with companies that didn't exist so that Caleb and Miriam could funnel money through them. He had documented everything. A woman named Carmen had been the children's ministry director for 4 years. She had discovered that donations intended specifically for kids' programs and activities were being diverted to personal bank accounts. When she questioned it, she was fired and threatened. She had her young daughter to support, and losing that job had devastated her. Together we formed a group. We called it the Ward Truth Group. We organized our evidence. We created timelines. We gave copies of everything to the auditor. We prepared ourselves for what was coming next. I made a terrible mistake. I trusted my cousin Elijah completely. I had known him since we were kids playing in that big backyard together. He had always been kind to me, different from other family members. When the investigation was happening, he asked if he could keep copies of my files for safekeeping. I didn't see any harm in it at the time. A week later, I discovered he had forwarded everything to Uncle Caleb. He said he wanted to protect you, Elijah explained when I confronted him. His voice was defensive. He said if he could explain his side of things, everything would be okay. I realized at that moment that there was no one left I could trust inside my own family. Everyone had chosen Caleb over me, even Elijah, who I thought was different from the rest. I received a voicemail from an unknown number that same day. "Keep digging," the voice said. It was a man's voice, someone I didn't recognize. "He's worse than you know. There are other churches, other victims. You're not the only one. Others are waiting for someone brave enough to expose him." The official audit began in the 3rd month of my investigation. Investigators arrived at the church with folders and cameras and measuring equipment. They photographed everything. They interviewed church employees. They reviewed years and years of financial records going back to when Caleb became pastor. Uncle Caleb acted peaceful and holy for the cameras. He handed out lemonade to reporters like he was some kind of saint. He spoke eloquently about his commitment to transparency and accountability. He quoted Bible verses about honesty and justice. But I knew the truth. Behind the scenes, his nerves were cracking like old paint. One afternoon, I was driving past the church parking lot when I saw him and Aunt Miriam arguing intensely. Their voices were too loud, too angry to be hidden. "They'll crucify you, Caleb," Miriam was shouting. "This is a disaster. Everything we built. Everything will be fine," he kept saying, but he didn't sound convinced. "We'll get through this. We always do." The lead auditor, a man named Robert, called me with urgent news. "We found offshore accounts," he said. "Multiple accounts set up in shell companies. The paper trail goes back 5 years. This is bigger than we thought." Then came the smear campaign. Suddenly, fake photographs of me started circulating online. I was supposedly in compromising positions with men from the congregation. The photos were obviously fake, poorly edited, but people didn't care. They shared them anyway. Someone vandalized my friend Victoria's car where I was living. "Devil's Accountant" was spray painted across the side in red letters. I sobbed when I saw it. The cruelty had no bottom. There was no limit to what these people would do to protect Caleb. But I documented everything carefully. I took screenshots of the fake photos with timestamps. I photographed the vandalism from multiple angles. I recorded usernames and information about who was sharing the images. I was building a case against them for harassment and defamation as well. My friend was scared. "Maybe you should back off," she suggested gently one night. "Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you should just move away and start fresh." But I couldn't back off. I had already come this far. And more than that, I knew that other victims were counting on me now. Grace, Carmen, Marcus, the others. I handed all my evidence to the state investigator, the fake photos, the harassment documentation, the recordings, everything. Let's go public, I told him. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. The story hit the evening news 2 days later. The headline was simple but devastating. Local pastor under investigation for fraud and misuse of church funds. Uncle Caleb's face was splashed across the screen. His Bible, his church, his lies. All of it was exposed on television. The investigation report was comprehensive and devastating. $240,000 in diverted funds over 5 years. Forged documents. Offshore accounts. Falsified tax records. It was all there, all exposed for the entire city to see. Donations stopped completely. Families started requesting their contributions back. The church's reputation was destroyed in a single news cycle. People felt betrayed. People felt angry. People felt like fools for trusting him. Reporters camped outside the sanctuary. Cameras followed my uncle as he tried to enter the church building. He looked diminished, smaller than he ever had before. He looked like what he actually was, a thief and a liar. That night I received a text from Aunt Miriam. Just one sentence. You think you've won? Wait until you see the will. That message sent me down another rabbit hole. I asked Patricia to look into my mother's estate. My mother passed away when I was 7 years old. She had left a trust. Or at least I thought she had. What we discovered was horrifying. Caleb had changed the terms of my mother's trust. He had diverted her inheritance, money my mother had specifically set aside for me in her will, into ward ministries. He used my mother's name as a tax shield for the church. He had turned my mother's love for me into a tool for his theft. It wasn't just financial fraud. It was desecrated. It was using my dead mother's memory to fund his crimes. Patricia looked at me over her desk, her expression serious. If we can prove forgery on your mother's trust documents, you can take everything back. All of it. Your inheritance. Your mother's legacy. It would all come back to you. My mother's legacy. My inheritance. My future. All of it had been stolen by the man I trusted most in the world. The Sunday service when the auditor's full report leaked was chaotic. Congregants packed into the sanctuary, angry and confused and betrayed. Uncle Caleb tried to preach, but people started shouting accusations at him from their seats. How could you steal from us? I gave you my entire paycheck. You baptized my children while you were robbing us. Caleb slammed his fist on the pulpit. You are all ungrateful sinners, he screamed. After everything I've done for you. After all my sacrifice. He stormed off the stage as people tore down the church banners. The sanctuary erupted into panic and rage. Some people were crying. Some were furious. Some looked like they had been physically struck. Aunt Miriam fainted on the altar. When people rushed to help her, they noticed she was clutching a torn envelope. It had Swiss account login written on the front in handwriting. Police arrived at the church on a Wednesday morning in October. I was standing across the street, and I watched as officers placed handcuffs on Uncle Caleb's wrists. He was still holding his Bible as they led him away. The congregation watched in stunned silence. Cameras flashed. News crews recorded every second of his arrest. I stood there with tears rolling down my face. Not tears of sadness or victory. Just tears of exhaustion and the weight of what had happened. I had destroyed my own family. I had exposed my own uncle. And even though he deserved it, even though it was necessary, it still hurt. A reporter approached me. Do you forgive him? She asked. I thought about that question carefully. Not yet, I answered. But maybe someday. The church shut down permanently. Investigators discovered that Miriam had disappeared. She had taken a flight to Costa Rica the day before Caleb's arrest and had never come back. She had become a fugitive running from justice. Reporters uncovered luxury properties Caleb had purchased under fake names. They found hidden donors who had been secretly funding his lifestyle. They discovered that 3 other pastors in different cities were connected to his scheme, using the same methods, stealing from the same types of vulnerable congregations. The investigation expanded beyond ward ministries. It became something much bigger. I was offered book deals and television interviews. People wanted to know my story. Publishers wanted to turn my nightmare into profit. I declined all of them. This wasn't revenge, I told the reporters. This was about truth. That's all it was ever about. The state board called me a week later. Miss Monroe, your audit led to a wider investigation. We've found 3 more pastors connected to this network. Your evidence was crucial to exposing them all. I had stopped an empire of fraud. Not just one church, but a network of corrupt religious leaders stealing from their congregations. My quiet, careful spreadsheets had uncovered something massive. Patricia prepared the case against Caleb for the actual trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Video confessions, falsified documents, bank records, testimony from multiple victims. He had no defense. Caleb's lawyer tried to claim he had been emotionally manipulated by Miriam. He tried to say he was suffering from mental illness and wasn't responsible for his actions. He tried everything to escape responsibility. None of it worked. In court, the forged trust documents were exposed. The judge ordered that my inheritance be restored to my name. The full amount with interest came back to me. My mother's legacy was saved. But more than that, the judge granted me legal ownership of the church property itself as restitution for the emotional and financial damage I had suffered. Caleb sat at the defense table, his face showing almost no emotion. His eyes met mine for a moment during the verdict, and in that single moment I saw everything. I saw his anger. I saw his regret. I saw a man who had destroyed his own life through his own choices. I whispered to him from across the courtroom, though he couldn't hear me. It didn't have to be this way, I said quietly. He had lost everything. His freedom, his reputation, his family, his faith, at least in the eyes of everyone who had ever believed in him. I spent the next months transforming the church building. But instead of rebuilding Ward Ministries, I created something completely different. A community resource center for struggling families. No sermons. No collection plates. Just free services and genuine help. We offered financial literacy classes for people who had been scammed or financially abused by religious leaders. We offered counseling services for people dealing with spiritual trauma. We offered food for families struggling to put meals on the table. We offered hope. I hired Grace as the office manager. I hired Carmen as the education coordinator. I hired the other victim, Marcus, as the facilities director. We all worked together to create something beautiful from the ashes of Caleb's lies. I stood at the opening ceremony wearing a simple blue dress. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. Faith without integrity is fraud, I said to the gathered crowd. This place exists to prove that goodness can survive betrayal. That truth matters more than reputation. That standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything, is always worth it. A little girl came up to me after my speech and hugged me. Her mother was crying quietly. My mom says you saved us, the girl told me, her arms wrapped around my waist. I held that child and realized that all of this had been worth it. Every painful moment, every betrayal, every night I spent terrified and alone, every family member who turned against me. It had all been worth it. 6 months later, I visited my uncle in prison. He looked smaller now, older, completely defeated. The man who had stood at the pulpit commanding respect looked like a ghost of himself. You destroyed me, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I sat across from him with the plexiglass barrier between us. No, uncle, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just uncovered the truth. I had brought his Bible with me. Not the one he had used to manipulate people from the pulpit, but a new one. I had bookmarked one verse very carefully. Luke 8 verse 17. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. I read aloud to him. I left that Bible on the table between us. I stood up and walked away. I walked into the sunlight free and dignified and whole again. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself off theirs. And I had finally let myself go free.